We actually welcome a very special guest to the program. We shift our focus to Gaylene Kanoyton. Gaylene wears many hats in the Hampton Roads community, but we welcome her here today as a part of her role with the NAACP. Gaylene, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I hope you're having an all right Tuesday so far.
We're getting there.
We're getting there. Hey, right there
Yeah.
with you, Gaylene. We are working our way there. And, I want to start by we're going to talk mostly about the recent Supreme Court ruling that has severely hampered the Voting Rights Act of 1965. If you remember from late last week and early this week, we talked about this for our viewers here. This was due to a redistricting case out of Louisiana, worked its way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's ruling is going to drastically change voting rights and the Voting Rights Act, a piece of landmark civil rights legislation here in this country, one of the most consequential laws in our nation's history. And the Section 2 of that Voting Rights Act will be seriously hampered by this Supreme Court ruling, which is going to, well, you know what? I will, rather than continue to talk myself, I'll go ahead and direct the question to Gaylene. I'm sure you could explain this far better than I could, Gaylene. I want to start with the Voting Rights Act of 1965 itself, and I want to talk about why that is such an important piece of legislation and what that did for voters in the United States of America. So can we start by talking about why the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is so critical?
So first of all, I want to say, and thank you for having me on. First, I want to say that the NAACP was built on voting rights, to obtain voting rights, to make sure that everyone had a right to vote, especially people of color and Black people. It's always been disparities, it's always been voter suppression, and it's always been difficult. Laws have made it difficult for people of color to vote, especially Black people. This law, the 1965 Voter Rights Act, put in place protections to ensure that people of color and every American had a right to vote without any discrimination. And so dismantling all of this now means that gerrymandering, partisan and racial gerrymandering is all you can do it now. It's gone away. So you can actually states can gerrymander on racial lines, they can gerrymander on partisan lines. And so that's hurtful for everyone's right to vote, and especially people of color's right to vote. And when I say everyone, I'm talking about people of color, people, not only Black people, but I'm talking about folks who's always been discriminated against in the long run. And then we got to make sure that we get through this process right now, because this is really bad.
And, when you think of a piece of legislation that has been in existence since 1965 and that is considered one of the landmark achievements of the civil rights movement and that has been widely celebrated for its positive impact on voting access here in the United States. I mean, you go through that resume and now you see the negative impacts that this ruling is having on that piece of legislation. All these years later, I wonder, is there an easy answer as to why this is happening now?
It's about power. The bottom line is about power. Ever since we've had this president in office, and even in 2016, you started seeing the unraveling of voting rights. And even before, in 2013, it was the Shelby case, which got rid of basically pre-clearance of any state that was known for having racial discrimination before they can have policy, make laws, or even do maps. They had to have it pre-cleared to the federal government before they can put it in place. And so it started a while ago, but it really picked up speed, starting in 2016 on. So this is about power, being in control. It's sending us backwards to Jim Crow 2.0. And that's what this is all about.
We talk about going backwards, and the Associated Press had a statistic from Sherilyn Efil, who's a professor at Howard University, just to kind of showcase maybe how legislation like this, or maybe just at least show how effective it is. In 1970, there were 1,500 black elected officials in the United States. As of today, there were more than 10,000 black elected officials in the United States. And so that is a real tangible statistic that's able to show what sort of impact legislation like the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and others similar to it have actually had on our governing system here and representation within that system. When you talk about going backwards, I wonder, Gaylene, if I could ask, what is your biggest fear with this particular ruling when you look at the actual tangible impacts it could have on representation?
It weakens our voting power. That's basically what it is. No representation, number one, in southern states, and no representation. It weakens our voting power. It opens up for more voter suppression, to make it harder for people to vote. It's almost going back to poll tax days. I mean, this is even worse than Plessy versus Ferguson. At least that was separate but equal. But this is not even nowhere equal at all. That's gone thrown out the window. You think about Dred Scott. You think about Plessy versus Ferguson, and all of these landmark cases in the past that was overcome by having the 1965 Voting Civil Rights Act, Voting Civil Rights Act. So that's all thrown out the window now. But we have to stay encouraged. And we have to make sure that we register more people into the system, and we educate them, and we mobilize. And we're hoping that even if you have Republicans, independents who want to see fairness, who want to see fairness in this government, want to see fairness among voting for all citizens, people of color included, Black people to be included, hoping that we'll override this, and then they will vote for the candidate that's for fairness, and not for the candidates for the MAGA movement.
And you mentioned Plessy versus Ferguson. Just for our viewers, 1896, a Supreme Court ruling that upheld a Louisiana state law that allowed for equal but separate accommodations for white and colored races, according to archives.gov. So that, in particular, is referring to segregation. And as you said, the Voting Rights Act, one of those pieces of legislation through the civil rights movement that helped to change some of what we saw before that movement. I want to ask, and this is, I hope my framing of this question is correct, but when we see the thought of going backwards and the concept of so many of the accomplishments that came from the civil rights movement being sort of erased by some of these decisions and some other decisions that we see from the federal government, do you see a need or an opportunity even, I suppose, for what could be considered a new civil rights movement? Is that something that you think that this is the time for, just based on the fact that we see the progress of the most famous civil rights movement experiencing some impairment?
I don't think it's a new civil rights movement. I think you build on what you have, bring back, the foundation of the civil rights, and then you build on it. You can't start over. You got to build on what you already have. We got to bring back, these foundations of equal rights, making sure that there's no voter suppression, making sure that everyone has a right to vote and have equal power, and not have dismantling of their voting power, and making it harder for us to vote. We got to make sure that we build to make sure that we strengthen. And now we got to bring it back, but we got to strengthen it even more and make sure that this cannot happen again.
Build and strengthen. I do really appreciate that answer, and I like the reframing of that, is to build upon all that was accomplished, because there was so much that was accomplished. You mentioned three things in particular: stay encouraged, educate, mobilize. Those are three things that you mentioned in terms of what can come next in order to try and fight back against some of these rulings that we see here. I'm wondering, is there anywhere else, anything else that you would want to add onto those 3 bullet points for people who are sitting at home saying, well, I don't want this to have a negative impact on my life and my future. What can I do? Stay encouraged, educate, mobilize. Is there anything else that you would include there?
Yeah, voter registration. You got to have voter registration, and education is important. That we educate our families, our friends, our neighbors. We need to educate them on what this voting rights mean, what this voting rights derailment meant to our community. But we have to stay encouraged because we have a voice and we have to use our voice. We got to take it to the streets. Now, in Virginia, we have a Voting Rights Act, and that was passed by Delegate Sia Price, and it was signed into law. And what that means is that you can sue in Virginia on certain things that was taken out of the Civil Rights Act, that was dismantled from the Civil Rights Act of 1965. However, some of the other states that don't have it is going to be severely impacted by this. Now, we will have some impact. However, we have been voting in terms of progression, progressive, being progressive, in terms of ensuring that we have equality amongst everyone. We've been fighting for all of this, and we've handled it in Virginia, especially in this past General Assembly session. A lot has been accomplished, and if you look at back in 2020. And other we're nonpartisan, so I'm just going to say it. In Democrat-led General Assembly sessions, we've got a lot accomplished in terms of criminal justice, voting rights. I mean, we have expanded voting rights. We were like almost towards the last, like 43rd or something like that, in terms of the hardest state to vote in, and now we like the 11th easiest state to vote in. With 45 days early vote, with same day register and vote. You have your mail-in ballots as well. So we have Sunday voting, and now we have Sunday voting. It's going to be twice a month. It's got to be signed. It's going to be signed into law, but it was passed in the General Assembly. So we got Sunday voting, and it's all going to be the same day. So we have expanded our right to vote and access in Virginia, and we just have to keep it up. But the 90 million people that stayed at home in 2024 didn't pay attention to what Project 2025 said. They clearly said, dismantling of the Voting Rights Act. That was in there, along with everything, many other things was in there as well. So we have to talk about the importance of what does this mean to you? What are you concerned about when we talk to people in the streets? What concerns you the most? Well, look, gas is now $5.09. I mean, that's how much I paid, $5.09. The food has gone up, prices has gone up. That's policy that affects you. And your strength is in your vote. That's the only way you're going to make change, is in your vote. And so when we talk to folks, we got to find out what's important to them and tie it back to why it's important to vote and why your voting power is important as well.
And when you talk about your strength is in your vote, I'll add, before I jump into my next question, you speak about the improvements in access in Virginia. I think that when we talk about the gubernatorial election and when we talk about this special redistricting election and the amount of participation we saw, I think it is a tangible symbol of what you're describing, which is that Virginia has taken real steps to make sure that everybody can have their voice heard. Now, when we talk about how voting is your strength and how here in the United States of America, democracy has been one of the pillars of our nation, and one of the things that globally we have been most associated with as a country. And now we see this Supreme Court decision. We see repeated questioning of the results of the 2020 election. We see the SAVE Act, which looks to change sort of how people are able to register to vote. We see this redistricting battle playing out across the United States, state to state to state, in which gerrymandering has become something that is so commonplace as to be normalized. When we see all of these different things all in this sort of 5-year stretch, do you worry about the state of our democracy in terms of that vote being our strength, continuing to be something that is actually a strength of the people and a tool of the people? I mean, do you have concerns about that when you just look at the chaos that we see within our voting system right now?
Well, first of all, we didn't ask for this fight. And the reason why we did redistricting in Virginia is to level the playing field, because this president and his legislators, they usurped the process with redistricting. They usurp normally what would happen during the census. You have your census every 10 years, and then after that, you would have your redistricting. They usurped that so that they could have more seats at the midterms, and we just couldn't sit back. We had to fight back. Normally, NAACP couldn't get involved in an election because it's partisan. This was nonpartisan. We was able to call out disinformation because there was a lot of money was spent to turn people around, voter suppression, disinformation, all of that. So now, am I worried? I'm encouraged because we've been through this before, and we were built for this moment, and we're going to overcome this moment. And we have our young folks that are standing on our shoulders, and we have to make sure that we support them and get them out there to take the reign. I mean, and every organization that I'm in, I support young people. I try to put them in positions where they can make decisions because, we're getting older and we got to make sure we pass the baton. But right now, everybody has to fight. And that's where we are right now. So am I worried? It is what it is. We expected this to happen. And now we're just putting tactics in place. We have a midterm in November. We have a chance to make a difference across this country to change the makeup of Congress. And although it might seem a glimmer right now, there's hope. And we have to continue on with that hope. And the only hope that we have is through our vote. That's what I hope, and our voice. So everyone should always speak up to their legislators, and tell them what you're concerned about and to make sure. But in Virginia, we've had good legislators to protect our vote, and at the same time, we have to make sure that we continue on voting to protect our vote and turn out in record numbers in November. And in other states, they have to turn out as well, too. It was the NAACP that reached out to 150,000 Black voters across the Commonwealth in this last election under redistricting. We were the only ones that can say that this voter suppression, those mailers, was a lie. We were the only ones because it was. And we've seen it before. And it's only going to be worse in November. So right now we have to be able to teach our base on what voter suppression looks like. What does disinformation look like? How to tell on a mailer when it's what's true and what's not true. If it's a quote on there, look at the date underneath the quote. And then research where that quote came from. Look at who paid for it at the end of it, paid for it by, and look up that organization. We're going to have to teach the tactics, AI. We're going to have to teach voters how to tell the difference between what's true and what's a lie. Because we have 3 referendums that's going to be on the ballot in November, along with our candidates. And so we got to start now educating, registering people, and mobilizing them in Virginia and across the country. But in Virginia, we got 3. We got the Voting Rights Amendment for Automatic Restoration of Rights. We have marriage equality, and we have women's reproductive rights, that referendums that can go into the Constitution, that will go into the Constitution, because we're going to work very hard to make sure that these referendums pass, along with candidates that meets our agenda with the NAACP.
And this is why we love talking to Gaylene, because I present the question with a degree of fear, and you're able to kind of turn it into something that is encouraging, and you're able to point out some of the positives that we've seen in some in some participation, and just the emotional motivation that you can take from a situation like this to go and create change. So I appreciate that. I want to lend a little bit of context to what you were discussing with redistricting, right? The process of redistricting. This started when President Trump sort of publicly demanded that Republican legislators in Texas go and find him 5 more seats. They initiated that process. California then responded by going to find seats themselves to try to balance out that redistricting in Texas. And then it went state to state all the way until it reached us here in Virginia, at which point it was put in a referendum to the people. Obviously, the yes votes ended up winning that special election. Now it's working its way through the judicial system. It's something that we'll keep everybody updated on as we go through. You also mentioned that we're all getting older, and I felt that. I felt that very deeply, Gaylene, and you got me with that one as well. Now, we sit
But
here
I'm a senior
today.
millennial.
Listen, we're all millennials here. We're taking that title. We're holding on to it tight as much as we can.
That's right.
You work you're so involved with the community here in Hampton Roads, and talking to you, I can feel the passion that you have to continue this fight. I'm wondering, is that the same sentiment that you gather when you're doing your work in Hampton Roads? Do you feel a motivated electorate to go out in November and continue to push this change?
I see it. I'm also the political action chair for the NAACP Virginia State Conference. So I work across the Commonwealth. We work directly with legislation. We advocate for legislation, especially during the General Assembly session. So we do a lot. So it's not only just in Hampton Roads. Oh, but there's an energy out here. And it's not just only Black folk. It's an energy across the board of people that are angry, but we are turning anger into action. We are not going to let this defeat us. And I want to make one clarification. Actually, the usurping of the census started really in North Carolina with those 3 seats. Had that didn't happen in North Carolina, we wouldn't have had the big ugly bill, because that's really where it started. Then it went on to Texas and everywhere else, but it started in North Carolina. And so this is why this is so important. And we see the effects from the big ugly bill, and it's just been derailing ever since then. But we have to make sure that, again, register people and check your registration on a regular basis to make sure you have not been dropped from the roll. You can go to vote.org. You can call your local registrar's office. You can do all of these different things. But even if you register to vote and you think that your voter registration is fine, you don't need to check it. In this climate right now, you need to be checking your registration at least twice a month. Just check it. Just go online and make sure you can do that. And you can register people online. People can register online if they're not registered to vote. I'm excited that Hampton University just opened up their precinct on April 21st. Norfolk State is working on that, and we have many colleges across the Commonwealth that are looking to put precincts on campus. I mean, we have college students that want to be engaged, and we want to have them have easy access. And of course, the naysayers are trying to stop that, but the students are speaking up. They're stepping up, because they want to be involved in the process.
And if you want to learn more about what Gaylene just referenced, that voter access at Hampton University, 13newsnow.com. We have a web story on that entire initiative, that entire change that they're making at the Hampton University Convocation Center, now the city's 31st voting district. Plenty of students in that story talking about how this will only help increase voter participation from college students. So, Gaylene, right. I really appreciate it. You even added there at the end, if people are at home and you're wondering what you can do, check your registration, encourage friends and family to check their registration, and help people get registered to vote. If you are wondering what you can do in the face of so much change, that is something where you can go and take some power back and make sure that you maintain that voice. Gaylene, is there anything else that you want to add this afternoon?
Yeah, I want volunteer. join an organization, join the NAACP, or join an organization that are meeting your goals or what you're interested in, because we need more soldiers to help us. So volunteer, join an organization. Become a precinct captain, do voter protection, or even become election officers. Go to your registrar office and say, I want to become an election officer. We need more people inside the polls as well, too. So that's very important. But the most important is stay encouraged, be hopeful, and as long as we are doing something and taking it to the streets and letting our voices be heard and let everyone, we are not going to take this sitting down. In August, it's going to be August 6th is going to be the anniversary of the 1964 Voting Rights Act, and we want to make sure that we celebrate that by raising our voices on what just happened. So we want to go to the streets. We want people to be out here saying, yes, this is what we had. This was a good thing. And where we are right now, we're going to fight. And this is the reason why we're fighting. So we have all of these different civil rights acts that was passed. And then we just have to continue on making sure that our voices are heard.
All right, Gaylene Kanoyton joining us today,
Mhm.
and the ability to uplift is greatly appreciated, Gaylene. Thank you for joining us,
Yes.
Gaylene Kanoyton from the
Okay.
NAACP, and I certainly hope to speak to you again as the midterms approach and as we continue to see developments here in our democracy.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.